100 tanks entered eastern Ukraine under cover of night. By sunrise, nearly the entire force had been turned into burning wreckage. It wasn't a clash. It was a massacre engineered through a network of hidden mines, drones, and artillery all firing in sequence. But here's the twist. Amid the firestorm, we see a Ukrainian soldier kneel down and say words the enemy never expected. "You are safe now." How can a battlefield swing from annihilation to humanity within the same hour? That's what this story reveals. Before we move on, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and like the video. How can farmland become the deadliest battlefield in Europe overnight? On the surface, the stretch of land outside Bakhmut looked like nothing more than freshly plowed soil, quiet ridges, and open pastures. Under that calm exterior, though, Ukrainian engineers were layering a trap so complete it would turn a valley of wheat stalks into a graveyard for armor. For 2 weeks, small teams moved by night, laying down explosives under cover of silence and erasing their tracks by morning before drones could spot them. What looked like idle farmland to satellite cameras had been rewired into a kill zone, wired not with fences or concrete, but with hidden triggers waiting for engines heavy enough to wake them. The work fell to Ukraine's 93rd Mechanized Brigade. These soldiers spent 14 nights creating something that went beyond a simple minefield. They carved corridors in the soil and built overlapping arcs of destruction. The brigade buried more than 120 TM-83 anti-tank mines, devices designed to cut through armor by focusing a shaped charge straight into a vehicle's underside. Alongside them, over 200 explosive charges were placed, staggered at distances engineered to ensure no section of the valley would allow safe passage. The placement wasn't haphazard. Weapons were laid out in geometric lines, connected to seismic devices able to sense the approach of track links pressing down onto the dirt. A tank might roll past one patch, but it unknowingly set off the trigger that armed a second or even third section waiting further down its line. While Ukraine was designing this invisible cage, the armored column from North Korea and its Russian partners were quietly building confidence. To commanders on their side, the valley looked like the easiest breakthrough route. It offered wide space to maneuver, no obvious fortifications, and no anti-armor trenches that could slow their advance. For all intents, it appeared undefended farmland. Their confidence was only reinforced by weeks of drone images that missed the subtle, nocturnal preparation of the Ukrainian troops moving under tree lines and covering their work with shovels. What they thought was open country was in truth more dangerous than any wall of concrete because its defenses were hidden until the very instant they ignited. At 3:21 in the morning, a lead tank tripped a buried TM-83. The blast pushed a molten jet through its armor, igniting fuel and ammunition. That single detonation signaled more than just one destroyed machine. It set off a chain reaction, one scatter charge igniting another, then seismic triggers overloading with shock signals as nearby tanks pressed forward to escape. Explosions rolled across the valley in waves, blowing apart treads, rupturing hulls, and throwing out sheets of flame so bright they lit up the night sky. The armored column had driven straight into a design of collapse, one where every attempt to maneuver triggered another strike. Within minutes, dozens of vehicles were burning, their escape routes cut by secondary charges and falling wreckage. Commanders who expected to break through in hours were now shouting in confusion, watching their formations vanish in fire before they had even engaged an enemy position. By dawn, the farmland didn't resemble farmland. Blackened craters stretched across the soil. Tank shells lay cooked off in heaps, and melted armor plates cooled on the ground. What had been conceived as a passage toward victory had been re-engineered into a synchronized killing field, precise enough to destroy an entire armored brigade in a single night. But destruction was only half the story, because what followed after the firestorm revealed something no one expected. What happens when soldiers meet their enemies face to face after annihilating their force? The valley that only hours before was filled with fire and explosions now lay in silence, except for the hiss of burning diesel and the sharp cracks of ammunition cooking off inside destroyed tanks. The charred wrecks stretched across the horizon, still glowing from the night's destruction. Between them, figures began to move. Men in torn uniforms, some staggering, others crawling, their weapons discarded in the dirt. These were North Korean and Russian soldiers who had been trapped inside that valley of fire. Now stunned survivors in a place that no longer looked like open farmland, but like the aftermath of an inferno. Most would expect that kind of battlefield to bring only more blood. After tank columns and artillery blasts, what else could meet the enemy except gunfire or indifference? Soldiers might have turned away, leaving their foes to crawl among burning vehicles as punishment for the attack. The sheer scale of destruction suggested a merciless ending where prisoners became little more than casualties waiting to happen. But that assumption proved wrong. Instead of vengeance, something startling played out among the smoke and twisted steel. Ukrainian medical teams advanced, not with rifles in hand, but with stretchers and canteens. One by one, wounded prisoners were lifted from the dirt and carried past the blackened frames of vehicles that had just hours before held their comrades. Water was poured into canteens and offered to men who still coughed from the smoke. Tea was passed into trembling hands, small, almost mundane gestures, but made remarkable in the setting of catastrophic violence. Each act reminded both sides that even amid war, choices were being made to preserve life. The image of these paramedics kneeling beside wounded prisoners turned the atmosphere of the valley completely around. For a brief moment, the ground that had been engineered for destruction became a place of very human decisions. One soldier, injured and scared, heard words that stripped away the immediate fear of execution. As he struggled to breathe, the Ukrainian who knelt beside him spoke calmly, "You are safe now." The message did more than reassure. It shifted the environment from hostility to unexpected restraint. Smoke still rose into the air. Fires still cracked across damaged vehicles. Yet those words cut through it like a clean line. That simple phrase conveyed that the nightmarish chaos had ended, and something closer to order had replaced it. In a place where survival seconds earlier had depended on luck, captives were being treated like human beings again. The response wasn't improvised. Aid tents were raised near the captured ground, with tables laid out, medical supplies stocked, and food handed out to detainees. Ukrainian soldiers who had spent weeks building a battlefield cage for tanks now maintained a zone of controlled calm over their prisoners. Meals were distributed regularly, bandages changed, and even the smallest rules of war were followed. This was not only tactical success, but also systematic discipline extended into the aftermath. It showed that restraint wasn't weakness, but an extension of control after dominance had been secured. The clash between scenes was striking. Minutes earlier, missiles, mines, and remote triggers had collapsed an entire mechanized force. Now the very men who had caused that destruction were kneeling to deliver aid and water. Violence and humanity stood almost side by side. The question naturally arises, was Ukraine demonstrating that restraint could itself be a modern element of combat strength? NATO observers who reviewed reports from that night noted that what unfolded in the valley showed that overwhelming firepower and strict adherence to the laws of war were not exclusive values. In fact, they argued, both together might represent the future of disciplined armies. Ukraine showed that destroying an armored brigade was only the first half of the battle. By combining calculated precision with immediate acts of restraint, they redefined what victory looks like. Tanks were reduced to wreckage through engineering, but survivors were treated with order and humanity. That balance raises a larger question for modern warfare. Should restraint itself be considered a weapon as powerful as drones, artillery, or cyber tools? The choice to show discipline after overwhelming force may determine future conflicts. Tell us in the comments, does true victory lie in battlefield dominance or in what happens after?